Good morning. Is that good? There we go. Okay, good morning, everyone. Just to make sure you're at the right session, this is the session on assessing teacher effectiveness in high schools. And we know that that's an issue and a concern all the way from state legislatures to teacher unions to principals to the teachers. Everybody is very interested in this. And it can be a political issue. But there are some good ideas out there. There's some good systems out there. So we want to see what other schools and other states are doing about that and the research related to that. So that's what we're going to review this morning. Also, at the end of our panelists talking, we will have an activity to look at some of that, a time for you to ask questions if you want to do that. So our panelists this morning, the first person here is Sheri Leo. She's a senior technical assistance consultant at American Institutes for Research. Sheri has been the past 10 years working with teacher effectiveness at the district level as a teacher and as a researcher. And she's going to go first and present an overview of the research and that we know based on measuring teacher effectiveness. Secondly, we have Dale Chu. He's the Assistant Superintendent of Policy, Legal, and Communications Operations at the Indiana Department of Education. He joined the state in 2009, and he's been closely involved with the state in developing measures, drafts of measures, and soon implementing those measures at some pilot schools on measuring teacher effectiveness. He's going to describe that rubric for us. The rubric's still pretty thick, so I didn't try to copy all of it for everyone. That's a lot of paper, but you have one of the domains, one of the domains on your table that you could pass around and look at. Could you get me a drink of water? Sorry. Okay. Lastly, we have Phil Jankowski, and he's a principal at Armada High School in Michigan, and they have implemented a teacher measuring effectiveness system there, very different from what you typically find, and he's going to share that process with us. So without waiting anymore, we'll go ahead and start with Sheri, and she's going to share with us the research on this topic.
Okay, great. So, let's see. Can everybody hear me okay? Is this all right? All right. I see some nods, but someone in the back, not quite so much. Okay, hold on. All right, here, I'll just scoot over. Is that a little bit better? Great. All right. So, good morning, everybody. I'm going to be talking to you about kind of the research and best practices of teacher effectiveness to really help frame our conversation today about teacher effectiveness, specifically in high schools, with some good examples from Phil and Dale about what it really looks like on the ground. So the first question is, why do we focus on teacher effectiveness? Now, I know you've probably all heard this before, and you've seen some of this research, but we wanted to make sure everybody was on the same page, that research has time and time again found that teachers are the single most important variable impacting student achievement. And when we say teachers, we really mean teachers' effectiveness, how well teachers teach. And in fact, some of these researchers, in particular the ones who we've highlighted right here, have identified that a succession of good teachers could go a long way toward closing the existing achievement gaps across income groups. And they found that a 1 standard deviation increase in teacher quality raises test scores by 1/10 of a standard deviation in reading and math, which is actually a pretty big effect in terms of teacher and school research. And what's interesting to note is that while teachers really matter, research has, again, time and time again over the last 20 to 30 years found that teacher characteristics aren't really very predictive. So when we say teachers matter and their effectiveness matters, that's not related to observable characteristics such as master's degrees, education, it's experience. There are relationships between those things, but they're much less important than the difference that teachers make on those intangible things that we're trying to figure out how to measure around student achievement, love of learning, real differences in performance. And those differences in performance aren't related to which college you come from and all of these other different characteristics, which makes this really tricky. In fact, at this point, we haven't yet cracked the code. There is no real one way that we've identified to measure teacher effectiveness. There are lots of instruments out there. Lots of people are developing new models right now as we speak at the district level, at the state level. Individual schools are trying to make sense of all of this that we've heard from the federal government, the race to the top and all of the ESEA authorization. But we haven't figured out the one best way. There is no one best way to talk about teacher effectiveness. So instead of thinking about the one measure that we can all talk about for teacher effectiveness, I instead want to challenge you to think more globally around what we mean by teacher effectiveness and think about how this will vary by your context, which we'll get into in a little bit. So we have here a 5-point definition of teacher effectiveness, contrary to thinking about what often things are reduced to, which is student growth. This 5-point definition really talks about all of the ways teachers are effective. And the first facet of teacher effectiveness is about student learning and student growth. Effective teachers make a difference for students and what they learn. It's pretty straightforward. But effective teachers also have to do these other 4 things as well. So the second piece of teacher effectiveness is that effective teachers care about the whole child and make a difference beyond academic growth. Effective teachers also have to make a difference on these attitudinal and social outcomes for students related to coming to school and being engaged in learning and being cooperative and learning some of those skills that are really hard to measure. But that piece of effectiveness is just as critical as the student learning piece. Third, effective teachers are good at the practice of teaching. So what you see here under number 3 is talking about planning and engaging students and evaluating and monitoring learning. All of this says that it's not enough for effective teachers to get gains. Effective teachers also have to get gains by knowing how to teach and how to teach differently for different kinds of students. So instructional practices and planning matter. Fourth, effective teachers need to be part of the school community and develop strong classrooms and strong schools. And finally, effective teachers need to focus on each and every individual student as an individual and work with other adults to see that those students succeed. So it's about collaboration and professionalism for teachers, but it's not about collaboration with adults for adult purposes. It's with the student in mind. So all of these different facets of teacher effectiveness lead us to a more global picture about what it means to be a good teacher. And we probably know lots of teachers who are really strong in some of these components and weaker in others. And that's the real challenge here. And I really like this quote because this really gets at the heart of the challenge that we all face when talking about teacher effectiveness. The quote is this: "It's a hard nut to crack. The things that are easy to measure don't matter much, and the things that matter aren't easy to measure." And we've spent a lot of time over the last several decades trying to measure what we could measure, trying to count word walls and trying to check off whether teachers turned in lesson plans and quantify things that we could see. But those things don't matter as much. The things that matter are those 5 components that I just reviewed with you. And we haven't yet figured out exactly how to measure all of those pieces. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try. It just means we are really at the beginning stages right now. So I have up here, and I'm not going to read for you all of these measures because we're going to come back to this later when we have our discussion section. What we mean when we talk about measuring teacher effectiveness. You often hear using multiple measures, that we need multiple measures of effectiveness. Usually, when we hear multiple measures, people jump right to student test scores and teacher observations of classroom practice. Those are two really critical measures of teacher effectiveness, but there are others as well. And in fact, this list is not exhaustive. There are lots of other measures that are being explored right now through the Gates Foundation study, the Measures of Effective Teaching study, as well as at the local level. People are trying to figure out more creative ways to harness what teachers already do and to gather information rather than requiring extra work. How do you actually identify what teachers are doing in the classroom without exhausting administrators and teachers and adding piles of paperwork? And so some of these items here are really about looking at what artifacts already exist, and others are about taking snapshots and making sure that you do that multiple times throughout the year. So you'll see there's really a variation in these measures. What's most critical is that you use many of them. When we say using multiple measures, we mean don't stop at two. Think about lots of ways to triangulate a teacher's performance. How do you get a full picture and a full idea of what teacher performance looks like? Teaching is complex work, and it's really important to recognize all of those different pieces, and you will never be able to get student test scores to represent the full work of a teacher. And teachers, in my experience, really appreciate when there are lots of different ways to look at performance, that they're recognized as experts and they're recognized as professionals in all of these different areas. So keep in mind in this list of multiple measures that what we really want is to think about all of the different ways that you can look at those 5 different aspects of effectiveness. So finally, as we transition to talking about what this really looks like rather than these theoretical conversations, I wanted to give you a little bit of context for the practical side of measuring teacher effectiveness. So the way in a specific district or school or state we talk about how to measure teacher effectiveness really is impacted by these 6 things that are up here on this screen. It really matters what your local context is. And when we say the values really impact your choice of measurement, what we're talking about is how does your school or your district or the entire state standard framework, how does that play into what you're trying to get at for teacher effectiveness? Do you expect teachers to collaborate? To what extent is collaboration important versus individualized instruction and learning for students? To what extent are you focused on results as a results orientation and student measures versus whole child orientation? And that will vary. This is not to say that some values are better than others, just that it varies from one place to the next, and you need to have those conversations as a whole community to figure that out. Second, you need to be really honest about technological advances and limitations. You need to really be thoughtful about what your data systems can do and what your data say, what you need to build. So for example, can you link your students to your teachers in the data systems? That's actually a lot harder than it sounds. Similarly, if you want to do portfolios for students or you want teacher portfolios with artifacts, do you have the capability of doing that electronically? There are lots of aspects of practice that you would want to measure that just may not be practical. Third, and this is similar to the technological advances, you need to think about the data that you have and what's possible, given everybody's limited resources, what's possible to acquire. And when we talk about that, you need to think about the context of your collective bargaining agreements. You need to think about your resource and time constraints. And also you need to think about additional, if it's data about tests and other resources that would need to be created, or resources in terms of guidance for teachers. Available resources, when we say think about your resource level, we mean staff as well as money, time, and policies. Teachers' buy-in, it really matters where your teacher community sits on teacher effectiveness. What really makes people upset? That may not be where you want to start having this conversation. You really need teachers to buy in and be ready and willing to engage and cooperate. You cannot build a system of teacher evaluation or conversations around teacher effectiveness outside of teachers. They need to be engaged and involved and excited about this endeavor before you get started. And finally, the school, district, or state level of motivation really matters because this is really difficult work. It requires ongoing training of all people involved, and sometimes people don't really like the results of the system. You don't like having to have those hard conversations, and so over time, you need to ensure that you have the right level of motivation to keep up a teacher evaluation system and keep having these hard conversations. And if you're not ready to engage there yet, that's okay, but I would suggest that then you need to think about ways to build that culture before you start the hard work of this teacher evaluation and effectiveness conversation. And so with that, I think it's probably time to get more practical and talk about what teacher effectiveness really looks like. And so I'm going to pass this off to Dale Chu with the Indiana Department of Education, and he's going to talk about their system.
Great, thanks. Just out of curiosity, can I get a show of hands? How many folks here in the room are at their work at the SEA in your respective states? Okay, all right. Okay, so for those of you who are not at the SEA level, I don't know how interesting this will be, but that said, at least will be 2 or 3 people hopefully will find this fairly interesting. So, certainly from the Department of Education's standpoint in Indiana, I think Sheri put it really well. It is a really tough nut to crack when you're talking about teacher evaluation. And from the SEA perspective, we had a lot of internal conversations about how prescriptive versus how flexible the state should be when it comes to communicating what teacher evaluation should look like across the state. Certainly, one of the challenges we've faced in Indiana is that, like the national research, the widget effect is the one piece of research I'm thinking about particularly, which I'm sure many of you in the room are familiar with. In Indiana, we did a similar survey of our 300 school districts across Indiana, and what we found was that 99% of our school districts rate their teachers effective or highly effective, and that's if they even give them those categories at all. We found actually a good number of our school districts either didn't have 3, 4, 5 categories, or what was very frequently happened is a lot of the categories were binary, right? It was either you're satisfactory or unsatisfactory. And of course, in all those cases, 99, 100% of teachers were satisfactory. And so, of course, the struggle we found was, how could it be that, we had all these teachers that were just, doing a great job across the state, yet we have a third to a quarter of our kids who aren't even, reading or computing at a minimum threshold based on our state test. So, way in the beginning, before our most recent legislative session, in the days of, Race to the Top when it was first kicking off in Indiana, we were, like many states, gunning for the possibility of federal dollars, and certainly teacher effectiveness, one of the things pushed or pressed very hard for from the Obama administration. We were sort of caught up in, what are the things we need to do as a state to make sure that we're competitive, making sure we have the best, most effective evaluation system for teachers across the state. And so I remember very distinctly that we were actually in a meeting in Washington, D.C. with a number of other state leaders talking specifically about this piece. And then, after the breakout sessions, when it was, informal, people were hanging out in the lobby, people would start, chattering, and then, people would come and, hey, did you hear Tennessee? They're going to count student data to be 40% worth of the evaluation. And then others say, well, we hear New York's going to go up to 45%. And then we're like, heck, we got to be like 50%. And it was like this eBay of how student test scores should weight into the evaluation. And certainly when you're talking about high schools, there's a unique challenge there because high schools, for the most part, don't have a standard test given from grade to grade, and this is not unique to Indiana. This is across the country. And actually, if you look at just Indiana in general, not just high schools, but just the whole K-12 spectrum, of the grade levels that actually have the state test in Indiana, it's called the I-STEP, it's about a third of teachers in grade levels. So you're talking about, you got 2/3 to 70% of teachers that don't have a standardized test. So then, if you're going to say student data is worth 30, 40, 50, 60% of the evaluation, how then is that going to work for the majority of teachers that don't have that test data? And so way early on, though, we had said we were going to count the data for 51% of the evaluation. We said that we were going to have one state tool. We were going to create this statewide rubric, and every 300, each one of the 300 corporations, school districts in the state of Indiana were going to use the exact same tool, because that way we could compare from district to district, how well they were doing their evaluations. So this was our brilliant thinking at the Department of Education, about a year ago. And so we went around the state and talked with teachers and principals and administrators, and basically, started talking about our ideas. And we got some really good pushback on both of those pieces. The first one, in terms of our position that it needed to be more than half of the evaluation, what I just alluded to earlier, folks are saying, well, what about all those untested subjects? What do you do there? And then I'm not even getting into the quality in terms of, those assessments were designed, right, to test students. The test manufacturer or test contractor wouldn't necessarily say, oh, yeah, you can also use it to evaluate teachers. So I won't go down that rabbit hole. But there was that piece. And then, in terms of the one state tool, we had this tool, and then, folks would ask us, well, how can you have the exact same evaluation tool that you use in Indianapolis that you would also use in Gary, Indiana, that you use in Fort Wayne, that you would use down in Floyd's Knobs? They're all very different communities, very different needs in terms of not just the students, but also the teachers and what sort of the challenges are. So how can you have the same tool? So that was really helpful feedback from our perspective, and what we ended up landing on was we recognized we needed to provide some guardrails for school districts in our state. We didn't want to make it a free-for-all and say you can do anything, but at the same time, we couldn't be overly prescriptive and say it had to be X percentage or that it had to be one singular tool. And so most recently in our most recent legislative session, we got a very comprehensive teacher quality package through our General Assembly. And so specifically when you look at teacher evaluation, where we landed was that there isn't a specific number in terms of what the weight should be in terms of student test scores. But we did say that it needed to be a significant part, but we felt like we needed the school district, the folks with their feet to the ground, closest to the ground, to really be, our state superintendent likes to call it the centers of innovation in terms of driving this piece, right? Sheri alluded earlier to all the conversations that need to happen. Certainly, the role of the SCA is not to be the largest school district in the whole state. The role is really to be, I would argue, a facilitator, a broker of ideas, share best practices, but a lot of the powerful, I think, rich dialogue is going to happen locally. So that was one part of our solution for teacher evaluation. The other, recognizing that at the same time, we do have school districts that say, well, we don't know how to do it. Just can you just create something and give it to us? And so, how do we balance those two? So, you have in front of you, like Jayne talked about earlier, a sample piece of our teacher evaluation rubric, which you're still working through. It's still in development. There is a slide, I think, the next one, yeah, that's my last slide, where there's actually a link where you can see the latest iteration. But it's a work in progress, and I should probably provide some context for the rubric itself. As part of the legislation, what we said was, if a school district decides to adopt the state rubric, and the rubric is just one piece, there are also going to be other tools, resources, and so forth, right? Like the rubric, a principal wouldn't carry the rubric and actually go into a classroom and observe, because it's too unwieldy a document, but there's other pieces to it. But when that plan is complete, a school district could choose to adopt it, but they don't have to. They could also adopt programs such as TAP, right, or a program such as PAR, Peer Assistance and Review, or just any model that really uses master teachers and has some other elements to it. But we are creating this rubric because we do have a number of school districts that really want some guidance, and the feedback we've gotten so far from folks who have seen this is that they'll either like the whole thing, or they'll say, we like parts of it, but we want to change this domain, or we want to change this domain. From the state's perspective, we think that's fine. Great. Try it out. I mean, we know that anything that we can do to push folks forward or encourage that sort of thinking is going to help the climate when it comes to teacher evaluation. So, all that said, right now here in Indiana, we have contracted with the New Teacher Project to actually help us build out our teacher evaluation rubric and our plan. At the same time, I should have said that way back when, like months and months ago, at the state level, we actually formed a teacher evaluation cabinet. So what that was it was comprised of teachers, master teachers, principals, district-level administrators from all over the state. We wanted to make sure there was a good geographical distribution, represent both urban, rural, high socioeconomic need, affluent need. We wanted to get a good mix, and they were the ones who actually did all the initial groundwork on the plan. And Sheri talked about buy-in. I mean, certainly that's really, really important. As the SCA, we are not the keeper of all knowledge, and so the evaluation cabinet really did, a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of getting this off the ground. And so now the New Teacher Project has really now helped, come on board. They're working with the evaluation cabinet to push this even further. Now, that said, it was really interesting when we were in the process of developing this rubric, and we were going through our legislative session. A lot of our opponents would say, well, there's, no one is going to, no one's going to be interested in what the state comes up with. The state is trying to, there's an ulterior motive to why the state is trying to create this tool. They're trying to make sure that the reason why there's 4 categories is because the state is saying that 25% of the teachers need to be highly effective, and 25% of the teachers need to be effective, and 25% need to be improvement necessary. So this is a conspiracy by the state to force a normed curve so that a quarter of the teachers would fail, and then so there was all of that sort of going on, and it was really, really important to try to cut that off at the pass from our perspective to make sure we were constantly communicating with teachers to help them understand that we are providing this framework, we're going to build this resource, but in the end, you as a school district don't have to use it. If you want to come up with your own tool, that's great. Now, sometimes folks, when they hear me say that, they'll say, well, wait a minute, Dale, if you're going to give them that much flexibility, how does the state know that there's any measure of quality control? And I think this is why, for me personally, it's very tough to talk about teacher evaluation in isolation. I've tried very hard to do so far, and I told Jayne earlier beforehand this is going to be a tough thing for me because from our perspective at the state, the teacher evaluation is one piece, granted a very important piece, of many other pieces that need to happen if you're really talking about, or if you're really serious about transforming the landscape in terms of teacher quality. And so, for instance, for me, teacher evaluation goes hand in hand with school accountability. So let me explain. So in Indiana, like many states, we have categories in terms of how we grade schools. Currently, if you're the top, there's 5 categories. A school that does the best is considered an exemplary school. A school that's the worst is a school that's in probation. Now, the challenge with our 5 categories is that no one can, if you're not an educator, no one knows how to put them in order. Like, it's just really, really confusing. So as part of some of the changes we've put forth in Indiana, we've actually shifted to letter grades. So we're actually going to be an A through F system. And so I bring that up because in terms of how does A through F run parallel with teacher effectiveness and teacher evaluation? Well, if you have a school district and they have a school that's an A school, and they say that 100% of their teachers are effective or highly effective, from the state's perspective, we're not going to bat an eye at that. That's probably very plausible. I mean, they're an A school. I mean, and it's like Mike Feinberg was saying this morning session, right? The secret sauce is great teachers, right? So if you got great teachers, you're going to get great results. At least that's our theory of action. Now, on the flip side, though, if you're a school that's an F school, and I reckon I'm painting in black and white, but just to illustrate, if you're an F school, and then you're going to tell the state that 100% of your teachers are highly effective and effective, then we're going to kind of be like, okay, well, let's take a look at that. So this is how, from the SEA's perspective, we're very comfortable in terms of maximizing the amount of flexibility we give to school districts on this piece. Okay, so I talked about, and I'll be shifting soon. I don't know how much time I have left. I could talk for hours on this topic and probably put you all to sleep, and myself included. We had all this opposition. Folks were saying no one is going to be interested in this state tool. No one, just watch. So what we said was, okay, well, we're developing this tool. It's still not done. But it is really important for us, before we say, hey, everyone come and use the state tool, we wanted to make sure we could pilot it with some school districts across the state. And you're not going to get any better results than actually having administrators, teachers actually use this tool. And so what we did was we put out, and we just opened it up to the whole state, said, hey, if you're interested in applying to be part of our pilot this fall, let us know. And I should say that when it comes to the pilot, it wasn't just the pilot in terms of using this rubric. I mean, we actually have 2 tracks on our pilot. The first track is districts that want to use this actual tool. But we had a second track, which we called our alternative track. And what the alternative track is you as a school district, you don't want to use this tool. You want to use some other tool. But what you are going to commit to is following our state guidelines. So what are our state guidelines? Well, one, whatever evaluation tool you use, it's got to be done at least annually. It has to differentiate your teachers across 4 categories, right? Highly effective to ineffective. And again, we're not saying how many teachers need to be or what percentage of teachers need to be in each of those, but you need to have that mechanism in place. You also need to make sure that data plays a role in the evaluation. Again, it's not specified in terms of the weight, and I can talk in a moment how that would work for high schools. I think those were the key pieces. And then the other piece was multiple measures, which Sheri showed a lot of those examples on her slide earlier, which I think makes a lot of sense. So we had those 2 tracks, and we said, okay, if you're interested in applying, let us know. And we actually had over 30 school districts apply. And what was really interesting also is not only did we have over 30 districts apply, you would think, oh, maybe they all applied for the alternative track, right? No one actually wants to use the state tool. Actually, it was a 50-50 split in terms of districts that were interested in both. And so what we narrowed it down to, just in terms of our capacity, is we've actually selected 3 districts in each of the tracks. We have 6 districts across the state. And we were very deliberate in terms of making sure in each track we had a large district, which our larger districts tend to be urban districts, and then a mid-size, and then a smaller size. And we had a criteria in terms of how we, filter through the applications and so forth. And so these 6 school districts now this fall are going to pilot this evaluation plan for us. And we have got some steps in place to make sure we're sharing that knowledge throughout this fall, even into the spring, with all school districts across the state, because really for us, this is completely uncharted territory. Now, when it comes to high schools, okay, well, how do you evaluate high school teachers when there isn't that set tests. And I'm sure Phil's going to be able to talk a little bit more about that as well, so I won't try to steal any of his thunder. But really from our perspective, again, I go back to A through F. Right now, when we look at our A through F system for high schools, it's a little bit different than our elementary and middle schools. But the things we're throwing around that the state has, at least, is we can track growth from the 8th grade test we have to our 10th grade test. We can also possibly look at, and again, possibly look at PSAT, ACT. Of course, we can look at graduation rate. Again, this covers some of it. There's still a lot of subject areas and content areas in high school that aren't covered in that list that I just gave you. But again, I think a lot of this is going to involve conversations at the local level, the districts, in terms of figuring out, okay, how do we take that and how much should that be weighted, how that should be used in our particular evaluation. Okay, so I think for that, I'll stop there. That at least is a sort of a brief overview of what we've been thinking, at least at the state level in Indiana, when it comes to evaluation.
Now, to take it towards more of a district approach, what I'd like to do is kind of walk you through. Michigan was kind of in the same place as Indiana, where, pushing for the race to the top, how could they adjust what they did? The current evaluation process before the changes in the law, which it changed January 4th of 2010, that every school district was required, it was pretty much your standard lesson observation. You'd have a pre and a post conference. They would have to be at least twice yearly, 60 days apart, and you'd have to, it'd be pre-planned. So you'd have to arrange with the teacher, hey, in 2 weeks I'm going to come in, and we're going to meet afterwards, and then 60 days later do the same thing. And that was the entire evaluation right there. And it was only required for every year in your probationary years, and once you receive tenure, then it would be every 3 years. And so when the state of Michigan went through and changed their law, they, much like Indiana, they changed it to where they wanted the multiple measures, and they said data had to be a substantial portion of the evaluation process. And then there was a memo that went around that said 40 to 60%, and they didn't really specify that, which was actually one of the best things that they did, because it led to us to have those discussions. And towards that end, they didn't change the previous law. It's still there in effect. They added another law to it saying it had to be annual observations and evaluations for every teacher every year. And to kind of give us another little kick to move us in the right direction, the penalty was the high school principal goes to jail, or 90 days in jail, or $500 fine if you don't do it. So you can see we had an impetus as an administrator that we're going to get out there and do this. So this is kind of the overview of what the result of that process. We started, it was interesting, we listened to some of the other educational organizations that started to do it, and a lot of them said, wow, we wrapped this up in 2 meetings, and many of them were just hitting the letter of the law, probably not the spirit of the law. And talking to our union president, we weren't happy with our evaluation process, and neither were they. I mean, it was one of those things where we have a pretty progressive staff. We've had 2 Milken Award winners on our teaching staff over the last 3 years. So we've been very successful, and we've had numerous regional teachers of the year and so on. And so everybody kind of wanted to move ahead, and this law kind of gave us the impetus to do that. And so what we came up with, the administrator observation part still follows the previous law, which is still in effect, but then we kind of layered everything on top of it. And so we added the walkthrough component, where now we didn't have to be in a classroom for the whole 60 minutes, and if you were 59 minutes now, it didn't count as an observation. The peer coaching, what we did is we brought everybody together from representative group of teachers from elementary through high school, and included special ed as well, and we sat down, and really we planned 4 meetings. We thought, well, if it took them 2, it would take 4. It really turned into we meet every Monday, and we still meet every Monday to kind of go over and evaluate this. We knew going in it was going to be an iterative process. If we got it right the first time, we would have been amazed, but it was a growth thing. And it's really, our target was, we started with the whole philosophical discussions, and much what Sheri talked about with what is good teaching. We wanted to get past that whole Potter Stewart, the federal judge, who when asked to define pornography says, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. Well, we want to define what good teaching is, and how do we do that? And so we started listing like the different things that we thought would be valuable. We looked at Indiana's model. Anybody's model that was out there, we were kind of taking those pieces and putting them together. And so the peer coaching part was probably the most important part, especially at a secondary level, because too often teachers are isolated. And so what we wanted to do was set something up so teachers could see what was going on in other classrooms, in other grades, in other buildings. And in order to do that, we set it up like this. One of the first concerns right off the bat was is it going to be evaluative in that process? And so we kind of said it's going to be, for the peer coaching, it'd be credit, no credit. It's like you'll do it, you'll hand something in, and then we'll move on from there. We also have recorded lessons, portfolios, the state assessments. The data part was a whole question in and of itself. We settled on 45%. We wanted to stay within the state range. And then we're still working on 2 of the optional components, which are action research and lesson study. And so I'll kind of walk through this with the peer coaching. It was interesting. What we did is we piloted this peer coaching aspect of it. We put out we want representative groups from each of the levels, and we had about 1/3 of our teachers that volunteered to do this, and it went very well. It exceeded our expectations every which way, because teachers get to pick one, we call it a critical friend, somebody that they can trust, and they get to pick one, and as an administrator, we get to pick a second person, and basically they go through and they do observations 2 to 3 times a year, and so it follows pretty much the same format. There's a short questionnaire. They ask what's their goals, what do they want to see to improve, so they have that discussion beforehand. And then we give release time for the observer. And so then at the end, there's a final reflection. What we're looking for is this collaboration. I mean, the positive feedback that came back from the staff was just enormous, and that they just never realized how much was going on that they didn't see. And especially if you have those where, as was said in the previous presentation before now, how the high school blames the middle school blames elementary. Those teachers that went, and if they've never been in a middle school and they saw the 8th grade, it was eye-opening because they've never been there. They haven't walked in their shoes. And so now if they did that, they really learned a lot, and it changed their whole perspective. And so that built that first level of collaboration for those teachers. The recorded lessons, this was something else. Once we got past the technical aspects of it, this also, we had teachers pilot this, and the interesting thing is, first the teachers critique themselves. So they use the administrative evaluation form, they go through it, they critique themselves, and this kind of helps with the whole aspect of every teacher every year. When there's one principal, one assistant, and you have like 30 to 40 teachers, that makes it difficult to be in those classrooms every year. So now with the recorded ones, this can qualify as an administrative observation. And having the teachers, I mean, really, as an administrator, that's what I want to see, is what's going through their mind when they did that thing right there in class. And, you normally write it down. And I remember when I was a teacher, I had an administrator who would write down everything. At 10:03, sneezed, kid said, bless you, and that's not really helping you improve as a teacher. And so now we can actually, it's kind of like coaching, you look at game tape. And so now we can look at game tape with those teachers. The other nice thing is, and this kind of came out of the pilot, we had one of our teachers, a phenomenal teacher, and her partner was her mentee. She's her mentor for a probationary teacher. And she said, the hardest thing was for me to explain to the person I was observing that as a first-year teacher, that's where she should be. And she said, what would be really neat is if we had an archive, if now we're recording these, if we can save these from year to year, so when she's a master teacher and she's 15 years in, she can show her mentee how she was as a first-year teacher, so they could have that. And that was something we never occurred to us when we were going into it. And so we also, with our probationary teachers, it gives them an opportunity. We're moving towards where we'll have monthly meetings with our probationary teachers, and then they can see what good teaching is and share their own lessons, and then people can critique. And we can also use that as a structure for, to shorten that learning curve for our new teachers. The portfolio. This was another one where we wanted something where you could cover all of teaching from top to bottom, where all of those little things that teachers do that is expected to be professional as a professional. And so how to do that, we take the artifact approach. It follows much of what we do on our school improvement with the Michigan Department of Education school improvement process and advanced ed. And so we wanted to kind of make that align so then it worked with the teachers and so that they didn't have this thing that they were doing a portfolio just for the sake of doing a portfolio. I mean, we had some concerns from some of the teachers that, wow, do I need to buy one of those Cricut things so I could really have the nice portfolio? And it's like, no, it's just a file. You drop artifacts into it. At the end, because everybody mentioned, in college they had me do this portfolio and I took it to interviews and nobody looked at it. It's not what it's about. It's about, can you have an artifact that shows this is what you did, evidence, I did this, and this is why it made me a better teacher. For the lesson study, this is kind of the next two parts that we're rolling out and we're refining. Basically, we wanted, now that we have a good basis and a good fundamental jumping off point, we wanted to look at, okay, we know now, we have a pretty decent data system in order to evaluate everything. Now we know where there's weaknesses. And in order to enhance that collaboration, we can have teachers that can look at it. So our fifth grade teachers can say, we are really weak in this concept. What can we do to improve that? They can get together. They can analyze this and then use the other aspects, either the video recordings or whatever, to analyze what they're doing to improve it and make it more effective to improve student achievement. Same thing with action research. It's not, now it could be other issues that are going on that we need to solve. And so those teachers can get together. And again, it's built on collaboration and growth so that those teachers can get together and show some improvement professionally and also show some benefit to the students in achievement. Okay.
All right. So now you've heard a whole lot of information at all these different levels, and we wanted to give everyone a chance to talk at your tables about some of these issues. So I'm going to give you a little bit of context before you have a chance to jump in and have some good conversations, hopefully. So the first thing I wanted to do was point you to a resource that may be useful for you as you go back to your state's districts and schools. I have here 9 issues to consider when thinking about measuring teacher effectiveness. You can find what we call the Performance Management Scorecard at this website on the bottom. And there are questions that it's designed for districts and schools that walk you through kind of like your quick quiz, in Cosmo, for those of you who've ever taken a quick quiz, that kind of gives you a sense of where do we stand and where do we want to go. And it's a quick interactive quiz which might be helpful to jumpstart some of the conversation for you. We've modified a couple of these questions to get you engaged with folks right now thinking about what your next steps might be. So the 2 bolded items here, comprehensiveness of the evaluation system, which we've talked about several times in the last 45 minutes or so with those multiple measures, as well as tying evaluation to student performance, are the questions that we're going to ask you to consider in the next 15 to 20 minutes. And the reason, incidentally, that we picked the student performance piece is that we know that is the biggest hurdle for many folks. It's a big hurdle for teachers to get their head around, and there's a lot of fear and anxiety around that. And it's really difficult in terms of data systems and technology and test availability, particularly in high schools. So we wanted to give you a chance, if you are ready at your school, district, or state level, to think about that, to engage on that. So I'm just going to read through what these 2 questions are. You're going to have them here in your little handout, and you can choose to engage on one or both of these as you see fit. So in terms of the comprehensiveness of the evaluation system, if you flip back to slide 10 in your handout, that was the list of multiple measures. It also might be useful to look at Phil's presentation on the multiple measures that they have included at the Armada, Michigan School District. And as a district or a school, we'd like you to think about which measures you currently use and how you might diversify those measures, what obstacles you might face to adding additional measures to a comprehensive system of teacher effectiveness. If you are at the state level, and thank you, Dale, for finding out, we have a few of you out there at the state level. You may want to get together so you can talk. Think about how these measures can and should be supported by the state level, and how some policies may get in the way of some of that. The second set of discussion points and questions are around the student performance issue. And we'd like the districts and schools to think about what you currently do in terms of looking at student growth in particular, not just student proficiency levels, but how teachers are moving students, either your school level or classroom level data for those of you who have it, and think about what you're doing with any of those data and what you're not doing. And then think about what you might be able to do differently and what you would need to create in order to get that done. An example would be you would start with your kind of core curriculum at your high school and identify end-of-year assessments that are used in all of the courses or all of the teachers' classrooms that teach the same course, things like that. That would be just one example and something that districts and states are starting to consider. If you are a state, think about it from the perspective of the high schools for a second. And think about all of those pieces that make it so much harder in high schools. And then try to come up with some ways that you might be able to help troubleshoot those issues at the district and school level and how you might be able to help schools move forward on this front. So what we're going to do now is, as I said, we're going to give you about 15 minutes, Jayne. Is that appropriate? Great. About 15 minutes to talk at your tables about one or both of these issues and really just engage a little bit about where are you now and where do you think you might want to go. And then we'll have a conversation and you can ask us questions about what we've talked about and we'll engage a little bit about what you've learned and what you've found out. So, any questions? All right, then go to it. Let's have some conversation. Great.
If we have any state people that want to get together, why don't you come up here and we'll find a special place for you.
Well, but sometimes it's almost more frightening to see it.
Yeah. You're right.
You know, I would imagine a lot of folks here in the room haven't actually tried to engage with that yet because it's the hardest thing. I bet. And so what have you learned yet so far? The quiz that you created. The explore to play it. Be really helpful.
The one that the teachers kind of felt had the most quality to it.
What percent of your teachers use it?
And actually, everybody does, because what we, even with our elective, we said the same thing as like writing. You can be responsible for writing for math and for reading. So there, you have some component that you are going to be measured on, and then we'll use development develop our own, like, state national guidelines for art or whatever. But everybody has to be measured on these three.
That's a really interesting approach.
Okay, great.
Yeah, that's a really interesting approach, and NWEA are such strong leaders compared to lots of other stations out there. But you're fortunate that you have
For
those
us,
tests.
it was trying to get this one thing. We do really well in our surroundings. And it's like, but our kids are competing with students. And so trying to get that to the teachers. Now we're going to look national.
And you use a national percentage.
Yeah, we use that. And so that's been the thing. I know they do the projected growth. We're going to let that go for like a year or two, just so that they can see it and all that, and then we'll bring it back up. Right now, they just have to either meet or exceed the national percentile and averages and all that stuff. So
But you can evolve over
Yeah.
time, right? I was going to look at your. I was curious about sort of the state versus district versus growth. So when you say
that growth that's NWA.
growth, that you mean NWA,
Yeah.
and so district assessments.
Those are end of course exams.
So you do have some of those. That's great.
Yeah.
Because there's lots of places that just have
No, well, the biggest thing when we present this, Michigan was really neat in that they set up something they call it private grade management. So we're looking for like a handful of districts that are going to push the bar and everything. So we're one of those, and so that's why we feel we need to kind of be able to head on this. And so when we ran by them, we're only going to make the state assessment 5% because everybody else is making 25%. And we don't get the state assessment back for 6 to 9 months.
It's a really good point about the timing.
Yeah, so
You
for us,
can't base everything on it if it's not.
no, and you really actually, and it's not the same year to year and so
right,
on,
Right.
And so especially for high school, because they go grades 3 through 8 and then 11th grade, so there's nothing in between. Now we do the Explore plan. It's not something the state's been like, well, we might put that in the meantime, but
And when do you give the experience?
we actually give the Explore plan in the fall, and unfortunately we give the ACT it's in the spring and the state testing. So.
Is it part of your test? ACT? Is it
ACT is, yeah. Problem is with the
Illinois.
wraparound test, because they have the ACT and then they have the wraparound test. So the first day testing is ACT, the other two, well, they got rid of. There's no accountability on the student. And so like this year, they got rid of. There used to be a scholarship with tobacco settlement money, so the kids could qualify for $500. Well, budget cuts, they got rid of it. So now, like, our kids are pretty good. Hey, we need to do well on the ACT the other 2 days. I mean, I'm worried because we haven't got the results back. Those
because they feel like they showed up for the first
the
part.
one that matters. They understand the ACT. We have
they
that.
need it.
Yeah, the other ones, and they ask us, and even some of the best parents, they're like, I told you don't worry about the other 2 days. I'm like, but it matters to me,
Right.
So, and that's where we're at. I wish that they would, instead of taking these half measures, I understand high stakes tests, but either go just to the ACT or mandate that they pass one of the 4 parts of the test.
Right, they make the whole thing.
And then they'll try for everything. And that's it. How do you measure that? So,
It sounds like you've made real progress in a fairly short time. When did you start?
we started really right after they passed the law, so January of last year. And it's been,
It's incredible, and you only have 2 that you're still really are under development.
Well,
it's a
we
problem.
piloted it, the other parts. Next year, what we're going to do is we're calling it pilot again, but we're going to every teacher needs to be involved, and every teacher needs to take one part. So now all those the other 2/3 that haven't done anything now need to be involved in something, and then tweak it again, and then go on from there. Yeah, I was amazed, and then.
And was it veteran as well as you?
Yeah,
was
well,
kind of across the spectrum?
it was everything. We
All
had people.
subject area?
Yep. We were. Yeah, they did. Our committee was really good. I mean, they went out and they did it intentionally, and it was fun because we'd bring all those teachers back to the meeting. Okay, let's get that. Going so well that the other committee members were like, stop it here because it's not going to get any better.
Don't get any more feedback.
It's like.
That's funny.
And we keep it to it's 90 minutes. We're going to meet for 90 minutes. We're going to cover these topics. We're going much stronger in that they had a lot more like throwback teachers, like older teachers who were like, you know, this is the way bargaining is done. It's like you can't, like this was doing totally outside of the contract.
Have you written a memorandum of understanding or anything to supersede the contract?
Well, that's, I mean, basically we put it in, we haven't done it. I mean, we've actually done a lot in the last 3 years. I mean, our contract is kind of weak as it is compared to other districts. It's like 26 pages compared to my previous one was like 75 or something like that.
And I come from Chicago Public Schools.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's probably volumes, you know?
That's right.
And so, and that's the thing. It's like, so here, you know, it's just, it's a whole different clock. You know, in the other district, we had a lot more money. In this one, we get the bare minimum of state funding. And so, the thing is, there's always been a culture of, you need something, you have to go above and beyond. You know, we have to write grants and so on.
So having less money is actually,
it
helps
because
the
like,
culture.
we need to do this because we, you know, especially now, we live off school choice. I mean, we've been growing out of, like, our entire area. There's only 2 districts that are growing. We're one, and then there's Chippewa Valley, which is just south of us. And we grew like 10% last year. And it's just, so we're like, we have to keep our name out there. We have to, like, you know, do well and always kind of be leading. And so there's that culture, which is just, it's out. I mean, having the state run interference has been huge because one of the biggest things, like, even with the students trying to up the bar for them, we went through our eligibility policy and said, hey, everything we do, every single decision we make is going to drive education. So, you know, we have Brown, we have homecoming, we're going to expand the eligibility policy to every kid. So, not just the athletes, and you have to pass every class. You have to have good behavior in every class. You have to have a 2-point GPA. You have to do that. Well, parents want kids to go and all this stuff. It took us a year to get it in. And then we moved it to all the dances and everything. And it's been the best thing. I mean, our GPA has just moved up considerably.
It's the same as the test. They need to know that it matters. If it doesn't matter, why not?
But being able to have, like, our state superintendent come in and say, hey, this is what we're looking for. We're looking for you guys to lead. And then it alleviates that pressure on the local level. Like, what are you guys doing, you know?
Right, you sort of need to be able to point to the state.
Yeah.
Or the public.
That's why changing that law, I mean, you never would have done it. You were never happy with it. But the feeling, especially with the leadership, was that never be able to justify it and listen.
Yeah, and that's happening all across the country. It's amazing to me that we're even having these conversations about what teacher effectiveness looks like and how you measure it and all of these different pieces, and people want more. Whereas I've been doing this work now for 3 years, and 4 years ago, even though everyone said, yeah, it's awful, I hate it, I want a new relationship. That's great. Oh.
Yeah, so I think he was,
Right. Yeah.
it's all over our
That's
state.
right. So Jayne, I was going to say, are you going to kind of facilitate the conversation, and then we can kind of jump in? Right, and I figured they wouldn't, but it's a good jumping off point a little bit. Right, and we can put up the kind of the time for discussion, but we don't have to actually ask people those. We're going to open it up for discussion. And so, do you want to moderate that? Because you also are out there. Okay. Yeah, that's okay. the mic over here so that we can all get at it, because I think it's most important that people get real concrete advice and thoughts about next steps and examples, because all of this conversation about effectiveness isn't helpful unless you know what you're going to do next. And the best way to learn that is, so wait, so what did you actually do when it came to the student test scores? So what is the tone of the conversation? Are people frustrated? Like, I'll never get this done? The conversation started in Chicago Public Schools. And I feel like if you can move there, you can start the conversation. Now, you could be further back or further forward. Right.
Well, they have that political cover.
And to actually describe that explicitly, if we were just talking about, would be really helpful if the question comes up. Yeah, that sounds about right. That sounds great.
How long were you in Chicago?
4.5 years. I taught in Washington, D.C.
You have 3 minutes to finish your conversation. 3 minutes.
I stayed for 6 years. It's great. It's great. I loved it. And then moved hastily back to Boston in late September because my daughter was born in November.
Okay.
And so we were trying to hurry up and get there before the baby was born, because that's what family is. And we thought that we're really going to need this.
Yeah.
We sort of didn't realize that it was really important to be near family until I was 9 months pregnant. I said, wait a minute, this is going to be really hard. So we kind of hustled out of here, and it's too bad because I really miss Chicago. It's brilliant.
My brother was relocated. He's an executive for was Kmart that was here. And so that's, at first he hated being away from everybody because I'm 107, so it's like everybody lives like right by each other. And
Did you grow up in the area where you said?
Yeah. And then, just Southeast Michigan. And then he moved down here with his wife and all that. But now I think they're finally like settled. And that's what I'm saying. And now Sarah's talking about moving to San Francisco.
I saw that.
He's like, oh man. He's like, I just get it. Like,
Well, it's still close enough to Michigan that I'm sure that you visit and he visits all the
oh
time.
yeah. But it's still.
Please finish your last sentence.
Yeah, I was engaged on all this teacher evaluation work in Chicago, and then I left. But my last day was unbeknownst to me. The day before Ron Huberman resigned. So everything has been sort of up in work. He was our senior at Chicago Public Schools after our.
Okay, let's come back together, please. All set? Great. Okay, you had some great conversations, and we just want to hear more about that from you to share, and also opportunity for you to ask questions to our panelists.
Great. So I hope that was interesting and valuable for you to think about some of these issues. We're going to put up these questions to guide the discussion, but I don't think there's any need for us to go through and say, so what did you learn? What are your aha moments? Instead, what we'd like to do is just give you an opportunity to share some of your thoughts, ask questions of any of the three of us or of your colleagues that are sitting here in the room, and just have a larger version of the discussion that you probably just had at your tables. So we have a good amount of time to do some of that right now. So if anyone has any opening thoughts about some of the things you were talking about, maybe that would kick it off. Great.
Please state your name and where you're from.
Rita Chig from Michigan, Saginaw. A question that we have is the non-content teachers, core teachers, your phys ed, music, art, etc. That has been the big discussion when you're looking at not so much effectiveness, but the performance growth, and they're not taking those tests. So can someone address how do you tie the teachers to that data?
The way that we handled it was much like Brockton High School spoke of. Every teacher is responsible for reading, for writing, and for math. They can factor that into their area, especially in the electives. I mean, a lot of times they can work it in, and so they're responsible for some of those concepts, and so those assessments do kind of follow them. And then the other part of it is if they have a state or a national like standards, like the National Art Standards came out recently, then we'll use that and we'll develop an assessment that we can agree upon that'll work for those areas.
Is Indiana looking at any of this?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably one of the most frequent questions we get from the state perspective is how do you test, if you're a social studies teacher or a science teacher and so forth. And I think a lot of this, I think what Phil talks about is right. I mean, the question is, I think it's the school district, how much do those teachers, how much are they responsible for the whole school performance? Like if it's a high school, how much does a history teacher responsibility play into, the graduation rate, for instance? Now, I would argue they should play a big part. And if the school is designed as such that they currently feel completely divorced from that fact, then there needs to be a larger conversation outside, which I think is actually going to be helpful because schools begin to engage in this sort of thing. They're like, okay, well, right now there is no connection between history or chemistry or in the graduation rate, and then also looking at other assessments that are out there. I mean, there's like advanced placement. Not all high schools have advanced placement, but they're just really looking at what measures are and what things can be put into place. I mean, we had a conversation right after the end of before our breakout where we have several high schools in Indiana that are really looking at, and actually they're starting to use the ACT model, right, the Explore plan, and they really feel like that model gives them a nice continuum in terms of looking at growth at the high school. I know you guys also use NWEA as well. Again, that doesn't actually touch all of those other subjects, but then in some of those other subjects, I think a legitimate question can be brought up, which is, well, if I'm not really, driving English language arts and mathematics performance, then, are there ways that I can integrate that into my content so that I can feel some accountability for that? I mean, for instance, I know there's some schools where, let's say the band teacher at the high school works really, really closely with the 10th grade team, especially their mathematics part. And so in Indiana, we have a 10th grade, one of our end of course assessments is algebra. So then, maybe the band teacher can say, since I work so closely with the 10th grade team and we're already, touching mathematical concepts in band, can, let's say, 5% of my evaluation be tied to? I mean, some of those conversations need to happen, and I think you're going to see a lot of different things come out of that. But I think, like Phil put it best, I think this is going to be an iterative process.
And I have one more perspective to add on that, too. The key, which Dale sort of just touched on now, is that multiple measures piece, multiple measures of student performance and student growth, that it is reasonable to think about tying some of these electives to your content that you can measure with your standardized test, but there are also other ways to think about student performance and student learning. And there are some models out there, Rhode Island is a good example, and Austin Independent School Districts as well, that talk about student learning objectives. And every single teacher has student learning objectives. And that is a weaker measure in terms of being able to standardize that across lots of teachers and lots of years and all of those types of things. But that is valuable, that teachers should be able to, in teams or individually or across a district, identify what the student learning objectives should be for art. And if you say, well, we have no phys ed learning objectives, why are you doing it? Right? There needs to be some sort of learning objective, which may not mean I end up being able to do Algebra 2 after phys ed, but there is a learning objective, and then teachers are held to a standard for those objectives. And so, as I mentioned, both Austin and Rhode Island, are looking at student learning objectives as one student growth piece, and then the school-wide performance for the high school as another student learning piece. And then if there are your music national content standards, identifying if there are certain pieces of information that all of those students need to know, and developing an end-of-course assessment for those as well. And the more you can think globally, the better. And so on that front, I just want to also put in another plug, which Sabrina had done before, for the TQ Center site, the Teacher Quality Center. There are lots of examples of different ways and different measures, as well as reports, one in particular on non-tested grades and subjects, to help you think critically about what other examples are. And you say, that will work for me, that won't work for me. But so it is about asking the questions. TQ Center, the TQ Center. And I don't have it with me, but I believe it's tqcenter.org.
It's Center for Teacher Quality.
Right. It's actually the National Comprehensive Center for Teacher Quality, but the website is TQ Center because that's awfully long.
Right. Okay, another question. You are?
I'm Sheri Calloway with Egyptian High School in the southern tip of Illinois. We were curious as to specific components that you asked for in a teacher portfolio.
What we worked off of was those Danielson, the 4 domains. And so each of those areas, they have, if you look at the Danielson domains and then it's broken down into the subdomains, I think it's like A through G for each one. And so each of those areas, they just basically have a file folder, and so then they have to follow that.
Do you have specific examples of artifacts?
Specific examples of artifacts would be obviously past year lesson plans or whatever. Teacher-parent communications are in there. If they've gone to professional development, anything that they've done. This is where we also factor in their additional credit hours and so on. So then if they have proof for that, and then again, the big question is always, how did this improve your teaching? Where did you use this? You went to this professional development and they have the artifact. Now we ask the question of, that's the discussion is, where are you using this?
Hello, my name is Leslie Anders from Hammond High School in Indiana. This question is for you, Mr. Chu. In the original teacher effectiveness rubric, which we used as a kind of like a blueprint for the turnaround model that we're using at Hammond High, the original one had planning, class culture, instruction, and leadership, and I'm looking at the new one that you guys are proposing. Where does classroom culture fit in? Because it is a proven fact that the classroom culture, which includes high expectations, relationships, building relationships, that is the biggest key to student achievement. So where does that fit in?
You know what? This thing's an iterative document, right? I mean, it's a living document. It keeps changing. It does keep changing. I don't remember if the classroom culture. I have to go back and look at the whole rubric again, in terms of where that classroom culture piece, ended up, or even where it's still moving right now, because the evaluation cabinet's still talking through it and so forth. If you are interested, though, I can get you in touch with the person at the department who is leading the charge on this from our perspective, and she could go as micro as you want in terms of where all those various pieces go together.
Oh, waving hands. I'm coming. Here you go.
Thank you. Yes. Hi, thank you. This question is for Mr. Chu. In looking at your rubric, it is very comprehensive, includes many of the elements that are critical in trying to evaluate the effectiveness of teachers and the student learning. The issue that I have, which is similar to the rubric, also I want to add, this rubric is similar to the one that we implemented and piloted this year as a SIG school. But what I found most challenging was actually using the rubric, because it is so broad and comprehensive when you're doing walkthroughs, or it could be a scheduled evaluation or any type of interaction where the teacher is engaged in the learning process. So how do you propose that districts train the evaluators or whoever it is that's using this rubric to be able to use it and make it manageable, and also make it something that is the teacher can take back with them and improve their instructional practices?
Great questions. And there's a lot of different elements you wove into that question. In terms of the making it manageable, absolutely. I mean, the rubric itself, when you print out the whole thing, it's a pretty meaty document, and you certainly, I would never recommend actually taking the whole rubric, actually going into the classroom to observe with it. It's just way too much stuff, and I think rightfully so, because teaching is by its nature complex, right? So if you weren't able to reduce teaching, down to one page, then I would really question, what you actually had in front of you. So as part of this, the rubric is just one piece. So the shorter answer is there are going to be many different tools. There'll be walkthrough tools that we're in the process of developing, full observation tools. Also, we'll also have tools that will be, my understanding of the way we're going to work through this is, let's say it's a principal. You take your walkthrough tool, you go through, you've done a few observations of the teacher, and then you come back with a rubric, and you're able, let's say, to get at competency 2.1 and competency 2.2. But let's say your tool is not helping you get at competency 2.3, and there'll be some guidelines that say, okay, well maybe 2.3 isn't per se tied to classroom observation. Maybe it's some of the other stuff. Let's say it's tied. I'm just making this up, but let's say it's around teacher leadership, and some of those things might not necessarily be in the classroom. There might be other things that say, well, you know what, competency 3.2, which I don't have any information on, you should actually use this, other tool to actually get that information. So we're going to basically try to take this rubric and break it down so that when you're looking for the information for any given competency, that here's your resources to actually get at that. And each of those discrete pieces will be much more bite-sized in terms of being able to actually take it and go into a classroom or sit down with a teacher. In terms of the training, it's interesting. We had a conversation here at the state table in terms of how do you, do the training in a way where you get, inter-rater reliability and all those things. And of course, one of the toughest things I think when it comes to training folks on, which is in general, but specifically around evaluation, is how do you make it so that it's less subjective, right? Because, and honestly, you're never going to have a 100% objective evaluation system because of the human element, right? Humans by nature there's a subjective element to it. But the question, I don't think, is how do you make the tool, or how do you make evaluation completely objective? I think the question is, can we do better than we do right now, right? I would argue right now in Indiana, we have 99% of our teachers are highly effective and effective. That's 100% subjective data source we're pulling from. So, how do we move from a 100% subjective system to a less subjective system? And now in Indiana, what we've done is we've actually passed, as part of that teacher quality package I talked about, some requirements in terms of how training needs to look like when it comes to evaluating teachers and the qualifications an evaluator needs to have. And we're not localizing it per se to the principal or to the superintendent. Even in our evaluation, a master teacher could also serve as an evaluator. The question then becomes, well, then how do you ensure the quality of that training? And of course, I don't have the answer right now because part of it is, this is part of the pilot process we're developing, and the state board is actually going to promulgate rules in terms of guidelines for training. That's part of what was laid out in our statute. We're hoping the combination of having some guardrails in terms of how training needs to look like, combined with our pilot, will actually move us in the right direction in terms of how do we make sure that folks who are doing the evaluation are well trained and equipped to do so. Because I think one of the biggest criticisms we hear when it comes to evaluations from teachers is they'll say, well, my principal has no idea what I do in the classroom. I'm a history teacher. My principal was a PE teacher. Knows nothing about history. In fact, he's only been in my classroom like once in the last 2 years. Like, you're going to expect this person to actually evaluate me. But then listening to Phil, he was talking about the recorded lessons they've done, and some of these things that really thinking outside the box, I think are going to help to move us in the direction of solving some of those tough questions.
Okay, one final question or comment, okay, we got one final one, and then we'll see if the panel has a comment.
How difficult is it to remove teachers who are deemed ineffective at the end of the school year when it comes to the Human Resource Office and work with the union? What kind of relationship do you guys have with that?
In Michigan, they're working to tighten up the tenure laws and so on in order to do that. If you document and you go through, and especially with this process, we think it's a failure on the part of the administration and in the school district if we have to get rid of a teacher. I mean, we want to work on teacher growth. They have every opportunity to get better, and along the way we'll document that. And if we've done our job, then it's really not all that difficult. I mean, if you have your observations, you have your data, and you have everything to back it up, then yes, you have to go through the tenure process, but in the end, it's not as difficult as sometimes it's made out to be.
So I'm assuming that the relationship between the district and the union is pretty good as it relates to the evaluation system.
Yes.
They're comfortable with it, and they're supporting your move to remove teachers that are ineffective based on the documentation you have.
Yeah, they've been involved in developing this from day one, so okay. They're supportive.
Okay.
But we know that's not always the case, right?
Well, I'll just chime in. So in Indiana, we have a very different situation. It's exceedingly difficult to remove ineffective teachers. Our relationship with the union is not positive. So as part of our comprehensive package, we actually passed sweeping collective bargaining reform. So, for instance, LIFO, last in, first out, when you think about reduction in force, eliminated. You cannot reduce a teacher, you cannot eliminate a teacher or remove them from a classroom based purely on seniority. I mean, this is one of the killers. You can have evaluation, you have a teacher of the year doing a great job, but because they were the newest teacher, they were just hired, you got to lay them off. And then also in terms of streamlining the due process, I mean, my goodness, it's like if you were to try to get rid of a teacher in Indiana, it's like you have to prosecute them to a criminal standard to actually get them out. I mean, it was that difficult. And now what we've done in Indiana is we've aligned teacher due process with principal due process. So a teacher, let's say, who is facing the possibility of being removed now in Indiana, I mean, they get a right to have a conference, a private conference with a principal. And I use the word conference, not hearing. There's a big difference between the two. They're not hearings anymore. You get a conference, you can have a representative come with you, and if you're not satisfied there, you can actually have a private conference with the school board, with the representative, but then after that, the school board makes the recommendation. The school board's recommendation is final. We've never had a process that clean before. And again, this package we passed in Indiana, I think for great teachers, they have nothing to worry about. But for teachers that have been struggling, I do think, to piggyback on what Phil said, we never want to get rid of a teacher. You want to be able to support them. But at a certain point, how many years does a teacher get before it's like, you know what, maybe this is not the right vocation for you?
And I actually have a final thought on this same topic, too. Kind of putting on my former hat as a human capital employee at Chicago Public Schools, because fairly contentious at Chicago Public Schools sometimes. That I think both Phil and Dale's points get at the important roles that each of the different entities play in making it easier to remove teachers who are ineffective, but also support teachers who deserve that support. And so to Dale's point, I think it's really critical to remember that there is a state role in giving cover to getting some of these policies changed and laws passed and getting change started. But when you're stuck with the process you have now, it helps to be thoughtful about why the process is as hard as it is. And to some extent, we all have broken teacher evaluation systems that didn't allow teachers to get real feedback on their practice. And so due process is partly onerous because there was no process originally. And so in Phil's new system that he was describing, you're gathering all sorts of evidence that is more objective and more data points. and helps everybody, the teacher as well as the administrator, see where there needs to be improvement. And over time, you have a body of evidence that makes the due process piece what it was originally designed to be, which is fair to all parties rather than onerous, because you already have a body of evidence that says, we tried these things again, we took another tack. We have all this evidence that says this teacher's just not doing enough, and that's not good enough for students. And so hopefully your new teacher evaluation systems with all of these different measures start to get you back to the point of looking at students and helping teachers understand why we even care about this conversation. We care about teacher effectiveness because we care about what students are learning and what they're getting out of the classroom. And in my experience implementing some teacher evaluation models in Chicago, teachers were receptive, and teachers who were pretty ineffective at the beginning many times rose to the occasion because we gave them a chance to, and we gave them evidence. And some of those teachers didn't rise to the occasion and chose to leave. So it changes your entire landscape when you start thinking and talking about teacher effectiveness more globally and more rationally than where we've been. So I think we have to kind of think about the old system and the new system and hopefully approach this as a whole new day and hope that we can get all parties on board.
Great. Okay, our time is up, so let's give a thank you to our panelists.